I want to welcome Agile XRM to the podcast. I've known the people at Agile XRM for the past 12 years. I've seen how their business process management tool can add massive value to complex organizational processes in sectors such as finance and government. If you have complex processes or a need for dialogues on the Power Platform or Dynamics 365, take a look at how this BPM tool can add value. You can find them at agilexrm.com or check out the show notes for more details. Welcome to the Power Platform Show. Thanks for joining me today. I hope today's guest inspires and educates you on the possibilities of the Microsoft Power Platform. Now, let's get on with the show. Today's guest is from Denver, Colorado in the US of A. He's a global Power Platform lead at LUMEN Technologies. He's a technologist by day and a composer by all the time. He's also a great Lego fan. So we'll unpack that in a moment. You can find his link to his bio, socials, etc. in the show notes for this episode. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Good to have you on the show. Tell me what you do composing-wise.
Yeah, so I think kind of getting back to composing after being gone from it for a long time, but that's originally went to school for audio engineering and for composing. And spent a lot of years working, especially in the electronic space and doing a lot of ambient work. And that's kind of what I'm starting to kind of get back to.
So ambient work, tell me about that.
So when kind of thinking back to like what Brian Eno has done or kind of some of the, trying to think of who other, kind of contemporaries of that. But what I do is referred to as a sonic colorism. And so I've worked with other artists where what I do is I take samples of like an instrument, just they're playing the instrument. And then we create kind of this sonic template from those individual sounds. Yeah. So it's a lot of fun.
Wow. Interesting. Tell me about food, family, and fun. Those things that you do when you're kind of not composing or not working. What do they mean to you?
Well, so our family's small and my son, he's neurodiverse. So it's kind of changes your dynamic on food. So I say recently our big journey has been on homemade pizza and learning how to do that and do it properly. That's been a lot of fun.
Nice.
So yeah. And I think, we live here in Colorado and I've heard people kind of compare New Zealand and Colorado in terms of just like all of the biomes and everything. So we like to spend a lot of time here kind of just, moving around. This last summer, we started getting into paddleboarding. And so that's been a lot of fun to do. So we've been spending our time doing that. And then we're a big Lego family, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
So we spend a lot of time doing that. And I'd say, fun wise, my son's actually in parkour. And so I spend a lot of time at the parkour gym watching. So I think I'm living vicariously through what he's doing.
Wow. Just on the paddleboarding, because it's something I'm considering taking up myself, being that I've got water all around me, as in I live right on the coast, and on one side I've got an inlet harbour, which is quite flat. How long at a time would you spend out? An hour, 2 hours on the board? As in for your core strength and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were kind of surprised. We didn't know, what it was going to be like. So that first time out, I think we were a little cautious. My son had already actually taken lessons. So, he's out paddling by us and he's doing, downward dog and everything to kind of show off. And so we got out and we were actually kind of surprised that you take a few dunks the first few times. And then, we found ourselves, generally out there for couple hours at a time because it's so relaxing.
Last question on paddleboarding. Do you have a hard board or do you have one that you compressed air blow up?
Yeah, we have the inflatables, but now that we've done it, I think we're all thinking hard boards would be really nice to have.
Nice. So tell me about LUMEN Technologies.
Yeah, so we're a fiber provider and across the world. So, we have deep sea connections. We're North America, EMEA. We have a lot of our counterparts as well who are in India. And we're also a technology company. So we're a company that really embraces change and embraces new technology. So that's kind of one of the exciting things about working at Lumen.
What took you on the journey to the Power Platform?
I think it occurred out of necessity. It was an area that hadn't really been looked after. And I came from the SharePoint side. So from there, it kind of was like, well, this is kind of falling into our area. And it makes a lot of sense to kind of look at this and see what's going on. When I look at back, like what our journey was, I was looking, when was our first app created? And it was back in 2017. And that was my app. So I realized that we were like, okay, this is something. But then we kind of looked at how it ramped up. And so what happened was, our team was primarily responsible for SharePoint, then the SharePoint Online, conversion that we did. And then we started to look at, okay, we have all of these assets here, and how can we now start to get our arms around them? And I think, one of the first things was we were looking at it saying, we have all these connectors in place. And what do we do? How do we approve these? How do we make sure that people are being safe? And I think that was kind of the point where it's like, all right, we need to actually start looking at Power Platform as a whole, and even just starting from the governance aspect from it before anything else. That's kind of how we got started there.
So it's interesting you said you're in the SharePoint team, because one of the discussions I often have with organizations is if they decide to go down a pathway of Power Platform, should the lead of the Power Platform and the team that then gets developed under that role, should they reside within IT or be adjacent to IT? I know there's a lot of crossover, but do you see it as a team that is, should be bedded specifically into IT, or do you think it should be, in your experience, adjacent to IT? And what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's an interesting question, because I don't know that it's an either or. I think that there's the technology understanding of it and what's happening there in terms of supporting it. So I think that is still very much an IT function. But then on the other side, you're looking at, so what's your security? What's your governance around it? Who is your center of excellence? So who's that COE? But then who is your champions group? And then who are your stakeholders? And then I think that side, they all come from different areas within the organization. Yeah. So I really think it's a marriage of all of those.
Yeah. Interesting. Tell me, it'll be of interest to the listeners. 2017 was your first app development. How many apps are you up to now internally?
Yeah, we're about 4,500 apps internally.
And automations using Power Automate as well?
We are just around 9,000.
9,000
as well.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. So that gives a sense of scaling. And then the other number I'm interested in is, what's the size of your maker community now internally, your citizen developer, your business developer? So
our maker community, and that's one of the things that I love so much, we're around 2,000 makers.
Wow.
Currently at Lumen. Yeah. And so those are active makers. And then they're also ones who are actively involved in our community. So we've got a good size community that really just keeps growing.
Incredible. And all up, your company headcount?
We are, I think we're around 36,000 right now.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So it just gives some percentages and scaling of what you have going. Incredible. So what's your role? What's your role now?
So I'm the global Power Platform lead at Lumen, but it encompasses a lot of areas right now as we kind of grow the team and learn how to make everything work.
What's involved in your role?
So we, kind of starting at the admin side, like we just talked about. So it's kind of like that daily care and feeding, and then kind of moving through that, making sure that, we're doing things like monitoring the COE, what's happening within our environment, looking at that, looking at areas that we, should maybe be more concerned about or thinking of. And I think that's, something about this role is that you never stop thinking about ways that you can do things better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So from like the administration and the governance side, where I think it's, especially as you're in conversation with other people, you start to realize, okay, I didn't think about that. And that's a really kind of great thing. So it's like, like a list of notes of things like, okay, we want to get these in place. And we want to think about that. So there's that side. And then it's also the intake process of looking at what other people, what they need. I hold office hours 4 days a week.
Okay.
And so it's two half-hour sessions each day. And then from there, the people who can come in and they can ask questions, Power Automate or, Power Apps primarily.
Yep.
we don't work a lot with Power BI on that side. And so I'm able to kind of work with them from either, questions or architecture standpoint, and we're able to kind of give guidance. And then we see those people they go off and then they become part of our community as well. And then I get to lead the LUMEN makers. And so that's kind of our monthly meetup.
Nice.
And yeah, so it's really, really cool. We get to talk about, here's what's happened in the last month. And we always kind of recap a little bit of, here's what's happening in our space. Here are things to look at. Always kind of reminding people of hey, security, watch your data, those type of things. But then the best part is that we have each month someone from the community presents. So they're showing what they're doing. They're, kind of using it as the use case. And then they're showing also behind the scenes what they did. So, we kind of have that full impact. So it's not us, it's not me showing, hey, I did this, and kind of boring people to death each month. So we really are, we're encouraging people to learn from others. And then they also feel more comfortable and more emboldened to kind of engage in the community, and people start answering the questions. And it's so that's kind of my day to day. And then, we do training, as well, in communications. So,
okay. So this is very interesting. Can you just give me a rundown? Is that monthly meeting you have about an hour long or less, or what's the type of, and what does it look like from a schedule wise? As in, what's your run sheet look like for that?
Yeah, so it's about 50 minutes each month. And we kind of start off each year. This is our second year in this. We try to have a theme, kind of just kick things off. So last year was Lego, which made sense. And this year is actually basically quotes from musicians, and it's always okay, so this is something about creativity, thinking process, things like that. So that's kind of how we kick it off. Is always just and a little background on the subject, and then from there we kind of go in and we give what we call the state of the platform. And so that's, hey, here's how many makers we have. Here's how many flows. Here's how many apps.
Nice.
Which also always leads us into, don't forget to clean up after yourself. So yeah, it's that idea of we're trying to be good stewards of our tenant. Then we'll kind of cover, things that have happened over the last month, in terms of releases or something that we feel is, particularly useful for someone, and then might even just do a quick tech demo around that.
Nice.
And then from there, we open it up for the presentation, which is really that's kind of the main part of that time. And then we open that up for Q&A, and then we wrap it up.
Nice.
It usually happens around 50 minutes or so. And we have, anywhere from, lately it's been about anywhere from 110 to 150 people attending when we host it. Yeah.
And are they in person or remote?
All remote.
All remote. Awesome. And is your makers geographically, how dispersed are they?
They are all over. I say that we almost follow the sun.
Wow.
In terms of our makers. So from West Coast North America, all the way to we actually have someone in Australia.
Wow. Awesome.
Who's making. Yeah. So it's really cool to see.
Is the structure and how you form your structure, how much does it align with your organizational structure, or is it totally independent of that? And what I'm talking about is, as you have people in different locations, is it just a flat structure? All those makers come up to you, or have you created any kind of sub teams based on, there might be folks that are just focused on HR within the business, or supply chain, or another, how is your teams forming, your maker teams?
So that's been almost an organic approach, because our team is still small, so we don't have that ability yet to kind of create those areas to guide. So we see HR, we see our field operations groups, and some of our government groups, and those they have their own space, and they've taken leadership, they've taken ownership of those environments.
Nice.
And so that's kind of, we've empowered them to do that with with the guardrails. And I think that's kind of the most important part is having those guardrails in place, but then being able to kind of support them. So, our idea is that if you own that environment and you're doing the work, but then you may also have kind of a distributed team on that side, then we're expecting you to kind of answer those questions from that group and then come to us with, what you can't answer or what you can't seem to figure out at the time.
So you talked about coming to us. So I take it there's a team of you that your full-time job is a Power Platform rather than, you doing other things plus a Power Platform. Would that be right? Yeah,
that SharePoint still is, is in our purview. But it's kind of one of those natural marriages.
Yeah.
And then our team is just kind of naturally coming into this from that SharePoint side. We have some challenges because a good part of our team is actually in Bangalore, India. So there can be issues in terms of what they can support and where they can support it. But with that, we're finding ways to look at, okay, because we have an environment strategy and we're able to address it by department, then we can take those and we can say, all right, well, this area is supportable. So, recently started putting into the, just-in-time access to the environments, and so we do the, 8 hours, they can go in, and they can help support in those areas. And then in the environments where they shouldn't have access or can't have access, that's just not something there. So we're kind of looking at how does that all start to play?
What's your rationale for putting that access or just-in-time access? Is it purely for a security measure?
Yeah, it is. And the idea that also there's an auditability there and we're not just leaving something, something open.
Yeah.
And it's even something that from the onshore perspective, trying to limit that access as much as we can where we are. So yeah, I think it's always just about trying to keep the doors closed as much as you can.
Yeah. You mentioned supportability there. At which point does an app go from the rounds of, I created an app to help me in my job, and then I shared it with 5 people, now 5 people, 6 of us are using it. At which point do you go, do you know what, we're going to have to wrap our arms around this and put a support model, because now this app is moving into the realms of, maybe personal productivity to actually, it's important for the business. We want to make sure that, you don't get the bus effect. Somebody does it, that we have one developer and they're the all knowledge of it. How do you make sure that you don't fall over, as in if an individual leaves the organization that's built the app, and what's your thinking around that?
Yeah, that's so they always you brought up the bus and the or the lottery.
Yeah,
and I remember early on in my career I had an app thrown over the fence to me, and it had very little documentation with it. And I called back to our headquarters and I said, so can I just talk to the developer who was working on this so I can get some ideas? They said, yeah, you could, but she just won the $120 million lotto 2 weeks ago, and we have not seen her since.
Yeah.
So I've actually had the lottery app. So we do. I do that. That's always kind of front and center of my mind. So we're looking at the COE. We're looking at the reporting there. First of all, to be able to see, okay, where are these apps? Because they start within the default environment and that kind of personal productivity side. And we do see that. We are also really fortunate. Just about a year and a half ago, we licensed the enterprise for the per user Power App.
Right. So unlimited apps per person now, right?
Exactly. Yep. So
makes sense.
That opened up Dataverse. That opened up everything. So now we're able to look at that and see, okay, a couple things happen. One is that we'll see when apps are becoming more critical a lot of the times is when we start to see DLP violations. So we see those policies that are having problems with saying, okay, I'm trying to use Dataverse, and then that very quickly ends up in a conversation, and we're able to then guide them. And that's where then we look at it and we say, okay, so here's what you're doing. And so we're going to move you into this kind of shared premium environment.
Yep.
And that's where we want you to kind of work from your own developer environment, do all your work, and then, promote it. So it's a really, really simple application lifecycle management there. Then, so some of those conversations I was talking about when we have those office hour conversations, that will a lot of time will also kind of reveal, okay, this is a group like HR. And we know that we should take HR and we should move them into their own environment. And then not only is it their own environment, but now it's their own stack.
Yep.
So it's dev, test, production. And that's, so we're working on then bringing the ALM story into that, which has been a big challenge.
Yeah.
But we're finally across that.
Nice.
And I think right before, I think a lot of changes are getting ready to happen, but we have that in place. And then we support those people on that side. I remember one of our biggest apps that was kind of our first really big app was for COVID tracking. We didn't know about it because we didn't have COE in place yet.
Yeah.
We weren't seeing that. And we were looking at making DLP changes in order to put in the COE. And so made a change request in Thursday night, got that all set up, moved Dataverse out of there, moved some of the connectors. 15 minutes later, red lights are, going off and saying, wait, what happened here? And we found out that, oh my gosh, they've got a COVID app, which is getting ready to go live at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. We just crushed them with, the DLP change.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of one of those first times of like, okay, we really do have to make sure that we're paying attention to what's happening here, because it's so easy to impact someone.
So back on that supportability, at which point do you go, you know what, we need a FAQ document library for this app. We need to make sure our help desk, do you hand it over to your internal help desk to support it? Or are your team, the internal help desk for all apps built on the Power Platform? How do you think about one, supportability and then ongoing management or app development, so it now has its own life. It's going to have feature requests. It's going to have bugs that need to be squashed, all that kind of standard stuff when you build software. It's now important to the organization. How do you make sure these things are all put in place so that you can smoothly handle it, company-wide?
Yeah, so our help desk right now doesn't really, they just route the tickets for us. They bring them in, and then we'll assist. But generally, what we expect at this point is that the owners of the area and the owners of the app have taken care of their ability to manage their users, to manage the issues, and to really, I guess, really be their own help desk. And then when they run into issues, then we're basically their support. Yeah. So we don't work with their end users. We really, I think that's part of it too, is that with IT getting out of the way, and letting, this digital transformation happen and have these people be able to do what they want to do, there's also an expectation of, okay, you are the expert in your area. So we expect you to support your app. But we also know that there's also going to be areas where, from a technical standpoint, you're going to run into issues. And so that's where we're really here to help you and to kind of streamline that process. We don't have currently a large portfolio of apps within our team, but that is something that we're looking at. At what point does something become, like to your point earlier, mission critical? Yeah. And then should it, go into our portfolio, and we essentially are the support for it at that time.
So one of my observations in business is that when a Power Platform community is established and a center of excellence is installed, and you've got your Power Platform lead and things like that, is that there's two audiences that happen inside the business. We'll leave IT to one side. You have the makers, right? The people at the coalface. They know their job. They know how a bit of technology is going to solve their problem. You educate them on the technology. You start empowering them, they get enabled. Then there's another business group that are, management, leadership layer, and they need our solution to do X. They don't have makers in their team, but they want to come to you and say, hey, we need an app that does this, this, this. We think the business impact's going to be X, Y, Z. Typically in the past, they would have gone and done a market scan for a product that would be fit for purpose. But of course, now you've got all the POP licensed. It makes a good business sense to go, do you know what? Let's see if we can do it on the Power Platform first. Is that a better solution than going to market for another product? How do you handle those scenarios that the business is saying, we need stuff for you to build, we need you to build something, and here's our justification for it, but we don't have the people that can, we don't have the makers in our team?
Yeah, and that's still our weakness, and that does happen, and we do support those, and we do have those kind of, they are, and that's why earlier I was saying we don't really have the portfolio, but I'd say it's we don't have that evolved portfolio that everybody understands. It's not something that we're out there saying, oh, hey, come on over, let us build your app for you. Even though I know that's what we actually, all want to be doing, is doing that. And so we do, we do work with the teams. We have, for instance, we actually are getting ready to roll out a kiosk. So a touchscreen kiosk that we, built in Power Apps for one of our edge enterprise computing centers. And it was one of those where, so they came to me and they said, hey, we really want to do this. And we talked through it. And I said, yeah, that'd be really good. But let's actually also talk to our teams at Microsoft that we work with regularly, because at that time Power Pages were, kind of just slowly coming up.
Yep.
And, was like, well, would that make more sense in Power Pages? And, we talked to that team and they kind of came back and they're like, well, we don't think that's really the area for this. Then it kind of went silent, kind of expecting that we were going to be doing the work for them. And then, they pop up on the radar and someone from their team was like, well, I just took the reins and created it. So, now that side, now it's a partnership. And I think that's probably, we have more partnerships than we do apps where we just built for them and now we're, the holding company for them.
Yeah. My last two questions will focus on connectors and components, because they're two things that, once again, I feel that, that like somebody in your role, those are two things that you're going to get a lot of requests for. And there's governance, particularly around the connectors. And then there's repeatability around the internal component libraries that you would build. So first of all, on the connector side, I'm not talking about the connectors that you get out of the box. I'm talking about the custom connectors that you need to plug into some type of system of record data set that you have in bespoke application ABC. How do you go about, because once again, a maker's not necessarily going to know how to build a connector, not in any, stretch, but they're going to need one, right? I need to tap into this data set we have in the organization. I know it's there. I currently export it to Excel and do whatever, but I would like to, have a robust way of doing that. How do you handle those connector discussions and then going, we're going to build one because there's enough demand in the business now. We're not going to use, copy and paste anymore to get the data from that system into something that we can transform it with. What's your thoughts?
We have a lot of people at Lumen who are really capable with understanding APIs and kind of so what that means in terms of the data access and how they work. Some of them are actually even responsible for building those internal APIs on our side.
Awesome.
They're the ones that are generally the first to kind of jump at that idea of, okay, I want to access my data through the gateway, and we're going to hit it. So, again, back to that idea of, separating the personal productivity and then working with them, making sure that what they're hitting is not going to be, SOX critical, anything like that basically shouldn't go out, and making sure that they're hitting the data and keeping the data where it should be, instead of deciding to move it over to Dataverse and that side. So, we work with them. They're always in their own environment on those type of things, because we find that's also easier to support from that side. And so it's actually been an easier journey than I expected. And that was one of the biggest really catalysts, I think, for that licensing, was that ability to create those custom connectors and to reach into our data. on that side. So it's been a really good story on it, for us. And I've been, really excited to see that happen.
Nice. Now on the component front, what are the typical, where a component's not available out of the box, but you want to do something unique? Do you have many use cases for that? And how do you manage that?
I think so. We're just kind of starting to see that, and that journey is kind of starting to evolve. I think that our makers are becoming more sophisticated, kind of by the day, and I think they're starting to understand that. And I think we're trying to make sure that we also do identify this idea of, okay, what is we have the citizen maker, or the citizen developer, but then we have the makers as well. So we've kind of identified that because we have a pretty large group of people who have transformed what they do at Lumen and are now full-time makers.
Wow.
So those are the people that are now starting to realize, okay, I can create these components and I can reuse them. And our goal next year is to start really trying to pull these together, build that catalog of those reusable components. Right now, we're trying to show them like the creator toolkit and how to start using that, get them in the idea. But I'd say we have a few people who are very aware of creating components and reusing components. And I think there are a lot of people who are they're also so focused on what they're trying to deliver. That they're not quite there yet. And then part of that also falls on me to make sure that they understand and that training is there. And then so what's our roadmap to get there? So I think that's going to be,
Yeah. And component extraction. When you see somebody in the business do something really awesome, we could turn that into a reusable asset to know, to pick that out. Yeah. And the organizations of working with see that similar type thing, whether it can be anything from a rating for how do we rate Power Apps internally, right? And you want it consistent. And then there's usability components that organizations want to be consistent, theming, branding, etc.
Well, I was just going to say too, on the like using HR as an example, that's a group that they have looked at that and they're starting to realize what those reusable components are. And in a lot of cases, I think it's more almost like, unit by unit that it's maybe reusable for them. And then things like the creator kit are things that are reusable for everybody, is more what I'm seeing at this point. But I expect that to kind of change.
Nice. Well, Andrew, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. And I'd like to do a part 2 sometime next year to see how you're going on your journey. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Business Application MVP Mark Smith, otherwise known as the NZ365 Guy. If there's a guest you'd like to see on the show, please message me on LinkedIn. If you want to be a supporter of the show, please check out buymeacoffee.com/NZ365 Guy. Stay safe out there and shoot for the stars.